Ah, gear, gear, gear. So much gear. We producers love gear. The band Empathy Test, however, really made me think differently. Let's talk about that. It's Geek Talk. Hello to you, my friend, and welcome to Geek Talk, where we talk deep and geek about pianos, keyboards, synthesizers, and music production. So back in March 2020, I went to interview the band Empathy Test. I first learned about this band when I was interviewing Rusty Eagan. You can see that series in my video history. And the Rusty Eagan 3-part series was very long and very ranty, but out of the many things that Rusty Eagan spoke about in that interview discussion with him, he did mention the band Empathy Test. The name stuck with me, so I googled it up, and one of the first things that came up was a Twitter posting from Boy George, where he referred to Empathy Test as, I think, a musical orgasm or something like that. So I listened to it, and it instantly drew me in. So anyway, I thought, okay, I really like this. I'm going to get in touch with them. So I got in touch with Isaac, and we set the interview up. And you can find the links to those interviews by clicking above here or in the link in the description below. But what I want to talk about today is specifically the interview I did for them on Geek Talk. Because typically when I interview artists, I like to do 2 interviews, one for my piano and keyboard artist series, and the second for my Geek Talk series, where we focus more on the gear. So when I arrived at their North London, should we call it Empathy Test headquarters, I was instantly welcomed, and one of the first things that struck me about them was how, first of all, they're tiny. They're all really, really small, and except for Adam, though, he's taller than me. But they're incredibly likable. There was just absolutely no ego. What I loved about the band was just this real sort of mindset of a real sort of entrepreneurial sort of like machine. They had everything kind of worked out, you know, this member does this member does this, Isaac, I think, does a lot of the mailing and stuff like that, and Adam does a lot of the production. So it just was a very, very harmonious kind of setup. And what I liked about it as well is there was no ego. They were just, first thing when I came in there was I was offered tea and biscuits, and anyway, so great people, really, really nice characters, very humble. And when, of course, we got to the section where I said, okay, let's see your gear for the Geek Talk series. When I walked into their studio, my jaw kind of dropped, and I went, oh, they've got no gear. Oh my God, this is Geek Talk, and I'm supposed to do a interview on gear, and they had no gear. Of course, you can watch that interview, and you will see that the interview went really, really well. So here's the point. When I say they had no gear, I don't mean that as a negative. I, as an artist development coach, am often saying to my students, I have this rule with them. Every time they want to buy a new piece of gear, I have one rule. You may not buy any gear until we discuss it. Because, let's face it, I know so many producers out there, so many, who've got racks and racks of gear, but not a single original idea, as I like to put it. We all like gear, and it's nice to have things, I too, I love gear as well. I myself have learned to control my gear addictions over the year, and I try to be as minimalist as possible, although I'm probably not as minimalist as what I would like to be. But I do like the idea, especially these days where gear is quite affordable and things are very accessible. I do like the idea where where less is more. If we look back at old, something that's just popped into my mind now is Thomas Dolby. I saw a snippet of him somewhere where he did his first record, and it was just ridiculously primitive what he had. He had nothing, but the songs were great, and we can pinpoint many examples of that. And I think definitely the nemesis and the downfall, certainly for the modern producer, or especially the younger guys coming into it, is just this overwhelm of choices, of not knowing what. I think the worst position you can be in is to be too fortunate, because you'll just buy everything and you'll never learn and master things. I always say that necessity is the mother of invention. But back to Empathy Test now. When I went into their studio, all I saw was a computer. 2 8-inch M audio speakers, a reflection filter, and the microphone, I believe, was a Rode NT1. And this made me realize, I'm always sort of preaching to my students, don't buy gear, don't buy gear. And, we try to focus on being as minimalist as possible because choice leads to procrastination, procrastination leads to paralysis. But my whole sort of philosophy that I preach really came into full display when I interviewed Empathy Test, and I just thought, there it is. Here's a band, completely self-funded, unsigned at the time, and that these guys are doing world tours, and of course they're always thinking, how am I going to do a Geek Talk series when these guys have got no gear? But we had a nice discussion, and of course Adam, who's the sort of the primary producer, I mean, just listen to Empathy Test music. It's great. And it certainly made me sort of believe in what I practice, in what I preach, so to speak, because I'd never been to a studio that was this minimalist. This, of course, I think Oliver had just joined the band at this point, and I think they do have a synthesizer, which he uses on stage now, an analog synthesizer. But certainly the first few albums, I think, were just done, as we talk in music production, in the box. There was no hardware, external gear. I believe it was just all in this one computer. And you can watch that interview, where we talk about that in depth. And also just what I loved about their approach to music was just like, if it works, just do it. There was a no bullshit approach. Of course, when I approached the interview, I approached it as I do with Geek Talk, talking about gear, talking about, work practices, mixing, mastering. And Adam, who obviously is the primary producer, his approach was a real sort of like no bullshit approach. It's like, we don't approach mixing and mastering as two different things, because usually you have pre-production, you have production, you have mixing, you have mastering. The way they do it is the way a lot of modern producers do it these days, and it's certainly the way I started out as well, was just working in one session. So you'll start and you'll lay the track, and you kind of mixing as you master. Once again, watch the video, and Adam goes into detail of how he does it. So I walked away from this interview being very satisfied, because I thought everything that I preached, there it is. I'm always the one telling people, don't buy gear. There it is. And I think Empathy Test have certainly proved that, less is more. And the ideas, as we say, it's not about the gear, it's about what's in here, and here. You don't need all this gear. And I was really fascinated. It really was an eye-opening thing, because for a band that had achieved that level of success, and they're really starting to do well these days, but even at that point, they were really starting to break through. And, to go in there and see, is that it? And it wasn't even a modern computer. But once again, it comes down to this very sort of grown-up, rational approach of, okay, what are we going to do? How are we going to achieve it? And we're going to fulfill it. There was no procrastination and talking and chin scratching and going, oh, what does this do? And what does that do? Now, I'm not slagging off people who have lots of gear and, like to experiment. I mean, I certainly do myself. But all I'm saying is gear can be a distraction. And, you need to keep the main thing. And Empathy Test, I always use that as a textbook example, especially when I'm coaching my students. And that is why I thought I'd make a video about it today, because they've definitely proved that less is more. And unlike those producers out there who've got racks and racks and racks and racks of gear and not a single original idea, Empathy Test have proven that it's not about the gear. It's about having exactly what you need, good ideas, and with rational approach and thought process and passion and desire and focus, you can get things out. So I just wanted to share that with you, my friend, because this is something I really talk about a lot in my coaching. I just felt I needed to get that out. Right, and now it's up to you, my friend. Please leave your comments in the description below. Do you agree with what I've said? Are you a producer? Do you find yourself buying a lot of gear? Have you heard Empathy Test? If not, check them out. What do you think? Is less more? Anything you want to say, just leave it in the description below. And with that, my friend, I look forward to seeing you again on Geek Talk. Until then, be safe. Adios.